back to the Kingsway podcast.
Welcome.
We
Glad
are
you're here.
very glad that you're here.
Yeah.
Back for another verse of the day. I'm not even going to mention when we're recording this.
I don't have
because
any
it'll come
idea.
out at some point.
In fact, I didn't know
2023.
until 3 minutes ago I was going to be on a podcast. So
That's
this is
how
totally
prepared
exciting.
and good we are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Be very spontaneous. Yes.
As is the norm, as is the tradition with the verse of the day podcast, we have not seen the verse of the day yet.
Do you do the drum roll?
I
I'll do
could.
it. Well, you're a better drummer, obviously, than I am.
Okay. Verse of the day. Even though you can see it right now because it's on the title of the video, but we haven't seen it yet because we're in the past.
Okay.
And I turned my phone off. And it's Psalm 62:1. Okay.
Oh,
Thank God it's not a minor prophet.
yes.
Psalm
62:1.
verse 1.
You gotta look that up.
We love doing these podcasts so that,
Psalm of David, I would bet.
yeah,
Not Asaph or any of the other guys. 62:1. Okay.
62:1.
There it is. You want to read it?
Yes. Where is it? There it is. Okay, Psalm 62:1. For this is in the NRSV, so it's a kind of a harder,
I've got the
more
NIV.
word for word.
Yeah.
We'll do years after.
Okay.
62:1. To the leader according to Jeduthun.
Mm-hmm.
Totally know that name.
Jonathan.
Haven't just read it for the first
Psalm
time right
of
now.
David. I was
Psalm
right.
of David.
Mhm.
For God alone, my soul waits in silence. From him comes my salvation.
The NIV says, similar to what you just read, but here's what it says. Truly, my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Notice the difference. The more word for word haven't taken the phrases to mean.
Could you read yours one more time?
Yes, for God alone, my soul waits in silence, rather than yours, which is my soul rests
Okay.
within or whatever.
Waits in silence. Okay.
But then the
interesting.
second line,
Uh-huh.
from him comes my salvation,
Mm-hmm.
yours says,
My salvation comes from him. So,
Oh, okay,
yeah, just a
same.
little, yeah.
just
pretty-
mine's a little more Yoda.
Yeah.
My salvation from him comes, which we said on the
Yeah,
last verse of the day.
Yeah.
This is, I think, a really important one. I'm trying to remember to think back in my Psalms class, where, so this is in book 2 of the Psalms, where in like David's journey this was probably at.
Yeah.
But we do know from the life of David that he did a lot of running and a lot of having enemies against him.
Yes, his best work was done usually in a cave. It appears.
Yes.
Yeah. When he was running from Saul. And, there's that long section, which I always find kind of frustrating. I may have said this from the stage before, but, we start in chapter 18 of 1 Samuel, where Saul turns on David and says, basically in his mind, he's going against God's anointed because he's jealous of David, because David's getting the love of these women they're dancing around talking
In
about.
short, Israel had, just to back up a little bit,
Yeah.
Israel had no king. They'd had God as their king for a long time, and they kept getting more and more whiny, and eventually were like, we want a king like the other nations. And God is like, good riddance, give him a king. What, like, they've wanted me out of here for so long, out of this role, but don't you know a king's gonna tax you and steal your sons and send them off to war and things I haven't done and
tax you to death and all this other stuff.
Anyway,
Turned out to be true, by the way.
maybe he doesn't say things I haven't done because sacrificial system. And it's not really a tax. Okay, we're not getting into that. But Saul is their first king ever. He is anointed, which just is like simultaneously sworn into office, kind of, and God's blessing him.
Right.
So he's God's chosen person to be king.
Right.
Well, Saul kind of turns sour after a little bit and starts doing some stuff on his own that God isn't super happy with.
Right.
And God tells Samuel, a prophet, a guy who talks to God, to go anoint this other person to be king. Now, when I said sworn into office, that's like the formal ceremony they would do. But also for David, when he's anointed, anointing's kind of when you take some oil and you drip it or pour it on somebody's head. That's like the physical thing that happens versus the hand on the Bible and the swearing in like a president.
So Samuel comes with this horn. I always picture a ram's horn or something, which I assume he has some oil in. But what's interesting, I think, there's several things interesting about it, but one thing that's interesting is that Samuel anoints David in a private ceremony.
Yeah.
It's just
nobody sees it.
Just Jesse and the brothers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're the only ones that know about it. And then the next chapter, David goes out and slays Goliath, and everybody starts kind of figuring out that, hey, maybe this guy is something special, even though he's just a young, teenager, probably late teens.
It even says I think it's right there between Goliath and his anointing, that the Spirit of the Lord leaves Saul.
Yes, it does.
And it goes in,
Chapter 16,
goes into David and is in him. But because of that, there's this power struggle where Saul is still on the throne and people aren't sure enough to where they're like, let's get him out of here and get David on the throne.
Right.
So there's this whole span of time where Saul knows the end is coming, knows God has already decided that he shouldn't be king anymore, but it's just holding on to it with a death grip.
Right.
Because as a king, you have control of armies and control of political powers. And so a threat to his own kingship is something that he would use his kingship against.
Yeah, and so so we go 14 chapters or so, chapters 18 through 31.
Yeah,
with Saul after David, and David's in these caves, and he's having to run from Saul. He's out in the wilderness. He's got this band of about 600 rowdy crew, rough-looking bunch that's with him, that kind of surround him, and so. And so there's this long section where, David gets anointed, but he doesn't actually assume the throne for years. Yeah, so
it's a little similar to how Jesus was born in his. Now, we're not saying David is Jesus or anything like that, but it's a little similar. It's a similar story trope to how
it is.
Jesus was born, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, pomp and circumstance. From the in the heavens,
right,
around his birth in a cattle stall and all this, and magi come and find him like a king, not kings but like nobility people and rich and wealthy and famous and high status. They come and find him and give him gifts because he's a king that's born. 30 chapters before he takes his next step in kingship. He's just living his life.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's in the temple schooling some religious leaders. Not schooling like trashing, but schooling like, hey, I know a lot.
So you said 30 chapters. You mean 30 years?
30 years, yes.
30 years.
30 years of his life before he takes the next step forward.
Yeah.
In his authority of his ministry.
Well, think about Joseph. So Joseph, at age 17, is sold by his brothers, kidnapped and sold. And he doesn't assume not the throne, but he assumes leadership in Egypt when he's age 30. So there's a 13-year gap there.
Yeah.
And before that, he had these dreams about how he's going to lead his brothers and even his parents. All that comes true later on, but it takes a long time.
Yeah.
And you were talking about Jesus. There's a long time between Jesus's death and resurrection where he becomes the exalted king. But then there's a long time between that period and his second coming.
Yeah. Currently, 2,000 whatever years.
Yeah.
Plus
and
years.
in the meantime, we've got this struggle going on.
Yeah.
And we have people that are against God's anointed one, like Saul was against God's anointed one, who are, in some cases, outwardly persecuting the Christians, or maybe shunning Christians, or whatever that persecution may look like. We're going through all that problems right now.
There's been a lot of narrative about that in the U.S. about how Christians are the whatever.
Yeah,
honestly,
that's not really
where,
much.
That's not really where we're talking about this happening. Like there are other countries in the world where, like in China, Christians have to hide underground, and all their churches look like the New Testament. People who are kind of in hiding, evangelizing, but afraid of being thrown in prison for doing that, get a page of the Bible and have to memorize it and then burn it so that nobody finds the contraband, and walk around as these living Bibles, and like such cool faith of these people. Yeah. That's persecution. Like the government's trying to crack down on you.
Yes.
But you're doing some guerrilla warfare faith. Yeah. By guerrilla warfare, I mean like not fighting back, pacifists. But
But
sneaky.
all of us face trials.
Yeah.
Jesus said to his disciples, you will have trial. You will have trouble. James promises that we will have trials, but we're considered pure joy. So, whatever that looks like, it could be sickness, poverty, frustrations with family or work or marriage or whatever that looks like, and could be persecution from other non-believers. Whatever that looks like, we're all going through struggles. And I know in my personal experience, there's a question of why. Why am I having to go through this, Lord? And David had to have that going through his mind when he's got Saul. It seems like David's troubles came after he got anointed, much more so than when before he was anointed. He was kind of minding his own business, had a pretty good thing going with his sheep and his dad, and everything was going well. He's well fed, he's well cared for. Really no big issues in his life probably. And then now he gets anointed and he's running for his life.
Yeah.
And I think there's some truth of that in all believers. When you come to Christ, you're having new problems come into your life, new challenges, and Christ is all the time challenging you to strengthen your faith through those trials and through those problems. And I think one of the reasons, and I keep thinking, well, why do we go through 14 chapters? I think one of the reasons is David wasn't ready to become king.
Yeah,
when he was first anointed. He needed testing. He needed deprivations. He needed trials. He needed all these things so that when he became king, he was ready to become king.
I've heard, and I think I have a lot of trust in the fact that the Gospel of Matthew writes the story of Jesus in a way that he looks like Israel overall. Now, I'm going to tie this into David in a second. But to where Jesus is born, they have the long genealogy, so of course tying him into Abraham and David.
Goes back 28 generations, all the way back to Abraham.
Yeah. And so it ties him into Israel strongly there. And then Jesus is a refugee into Egypt, whereas the Israelites are refugees out of Egypt. He's a refugee into Egypt because of a leader of the day threatening to kill all the firstborns, which sounds a whole lot like both the beginning of the Exodus, we're going to kill all your baby boys, and that's what sends Moses down the river, and God coming back and saying, I'm going to kill all the firstborns. And anyway, so all this is tied in. They come back, and then Jesus is baptized in the Jordan. That's him crossing a body of water, just like the Exodus, God parting the seas. And then he goes into the desert for 40 days, just like Israel wandering in the desert for 40 years. And then he comes up and gives the Sermon on the Mount, kind of like Israel in the Ten Commandments. And so there's a lot of tropes happening that tie Jesus into the whole story of Israel. Well, in the story of David, that kind of happens too. A lot of these tropes are repeated, where David is chosen, he's anointed, and then faces a big trial, and then has to go on the run, but is delivered by God at time and time again for a long time. And then, like, you can see a lot of these tropes of God's chosen people or person going through a lot of the same stuff.
And they both become kings at age 30.
Yeah.
Or start their ministry at age 30.
What this means is not necessarily that you will go through the same order of the same kinds of events or whatever, but if you find yourself in the place where you're in the desert, that trope. So for Jesus, it's 40 days in the wilderness after he's kind of anointed in baptism, as he's chosen or at least announced to be the Messiah, in a way, at least God's son.
That's and then he keeps it secret for some reason. But so go ahead.
Loves to keep it secret. This is a psalm, to get back to Psalm 62. This is a psalm for the desert. Now the desert, as this trope is repeated, we can learn some stuff about the desert, what that means for a season for you. It's usually a season of having less, usually a season of struggles and hardships, having to rely on God, and usually a season of preparation. Now, in what you just said, why I said all this is, yes, David went through that in the 14 chapters, whatever. Also, David wasn't ready to be king. This could be preparation for his kingship. And he leads as somebody who's been on the bottom and who's been on the run, and that changes his leadership as he steps into kingship. So the desert can be a time of growth and dependence on God that prepares you for whatever the next stage is. This is a desert psalm. Whether it's written in the desert or reflecting on the desert, whatever, it's a psalm for people who are in the desert. And so it goes, for God alone, my soul waits in silence. From him comes my salvation. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall never be shaken. And it goes on to almost repeat that word for word in verses 5, 6, 7.
Yeah.
For God alone, my soul waits in silence, for my hope is from him. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress, I shall not be shaken. Almost word for word. And then adds, on God rests my deliverance and my honor, my mighty rock, my refuge is in God.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of desert psalms, if you categorize it this way, in the whole book of Psalms, all 150 chapters. What you'll notice, if you realize that this is the worship book, the prayer book, the songbook, the hymnal.
Yeah, I really want to know what the song sounded like.
I know. Did it have some searing electric guitar lead over it? But like, what did it sound like? But this is something they used as they sang together. Even though a lot of the psalms sound like diary entries, very me and my, and I feel this way, and there's also a lot of sadness and anger and loneliness and whatever in the psalm.
Frustration, yeah.
They were also, and repetition. They were also sung by groups. You go to church and you sing.
Yeah.
How long will you assail a person with? Will you batter your victim, all of you, as you would a leaning wall, a tottering fence? That's a verse in their song that they sing.
Yeah.
And so when we come to worship today, the desire to sing happy songs, uplifting songs, whatever, there's room for that. But the desire to only sing that is saying that we should sing songs in a different way than the Psalms wanted to do it. Or to say you can only do songs that say we and our and us, all that plural language, is saying, I don't think we should sing the Psalms in worship. Those Bible songs we shouldn't sing in our Bible church.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I noticed in 61, going back up to Psalm 61, it says, for the director of music with stringed instruments of David. So clearly these were not poems that were just read like we would do it now.
This isn't slam poetry.
Right. This is, well, that'd be nice.
It could be slam poetry.
But these were actual songs. And I would imagine, so there's 150 of them, I would imagine that every good Jewish boy and girl, by the time they were teenagers, knew these songs by heart.
Yeah.
And
they were staying up late at night listening to the little radio and the headphones in their room.
Right.
My dad doesn't understand me. And then Psalm 100 and whatever, my dad doesn't understand me comes on and you're like, ah.
Yeah. But what's cool, that's cool too. But what's cool as I'm thinking about this is, this went on for generation.
Yeah.
Now we have the K-Love thing where we need a new song every 6 months, and we throw songs out that were popular 10 years ago, and we don't sing them anymore, and I understand that.
Yeah, because they're bad now.
But I like the continuity of this. Yeah.
I'm kidding.
For thousands of years,
yeah,
they were singing the same song, probably the same tune. Unfortunately, we've lost the music that went with it, but we'll see it again sometime. But I think that continuity is really interesting.
That's why, as a worship pastor, I've loved and been trying to incorporate a little more of songs from previous generations. So it's one reason I love O Come, Emmanuel when it's December or so. And we're waiting on the advent of the Lord. When that song was written?
Probably
the 400s.
Oh, that old. Okay.
It is translated from Latin.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It is old. Like real
I would have
old.
said 1600s maybe.
Yeah, that is not a Wesley
that's pretty
classic.
old, but yeah.
That is
400s.
old.
Oh, okay.
Heavily old.
Well, I noticed last week we sang, you weren't here last week, but we sang I Surrender All, which of course is an old song that I grew up with, probably from the 1800s.
Yeah.
Changed it around, some of the tunes that went with some of the melody.
Add a little section to it.
And then it goes back to the original melody, but it was really cool. I like that. Yeah. Can we go back to the verse for just a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, by the way, I want to correct. I think I said 28 generations. Actually, I think it's 42 generations. But you can go back and check on that in Matthew chapter 1. But mine says, truly, this is NIV, my soul finds rest. And it has a footnote for the word rest there. I'm sure that has some special meaning. But I think the word rest, in the Bible has a special meaning with kind of being in that place where even though you have the storm going on around you, even though David has this persecution that's going on in his life, and I mean real persecution. He could be killed at any time.
Yeah.
wake up every morning thinking, oh my gosh, even though he's 20 something years old, I could be killed violently today. But still, he's talking about that soul of his finding rest in God. And I don't think we appreciate that in our modern 21st century evangelical circles of finding rest in God. So what does that mean to you? What images come to your mind?
It reminds me, there's a lot of Psalms about finding rest in God that are also a lot of times about God being a fortress. And that kind of happens here too. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress, I shall never be shaken.
Yeah.
There's this confidence that you can rest in God no matter what, because he is a steady resting place. My favorite psalm that has this idea is Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble.
Yes.
That's true, but then it gives this kind of painted, illustrated picture of how strong a fortress he is. Therefore, we will not fear, even though the earth, this one says, this is a lot harder to read, but the earth should change or shake. Or crumble. Yeah. Though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumultuous. And then it just changes pictures to what's going on inside the fortress. There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High.
Yeah.
God is in the midst of the city. It shall not be moved.
There's a picture of Revelation chapter 21, 22.
Yes. Yeah. So these are all desert psalms, like while you're struggling, while bad stuff's going on. When I think about the storm that's here, the mountains being moved into the heart of the sea, oceans foaming and swelling. I grew up in the middle of the continent in Missouri, just like I think you grew up in Missouri.
I did, yeah.
Didn't see a lot of oceans swelling and foaming.
No.
What I did see was tornadoes, where the sky goes green, which is not a normal sky color if you haven't lived on Earth before.
Yeah.
The sky goes green, and there's this eerie silence other than the tornado sirens going off. And we'd be in the basement of our house in St. Louis and look out the back door, just glass panes on that door, but we're at the safest spot we can be. Hopefully that glass doesn't get us. Just watching it get green and dark quickly. And if I was outside, I'd be a lot more scared. The fact that I could see it made me a little scared.
Yeah.
But we were in our basement, which is kind of built into the ground. So you've got all this dirt, you've got the cement around you, you've got whatever. And there's this feeling of comfort around watching the earth go crazy. Watching this tumultuous nature event. But inside, you're kind of just chilling. You're listening to the radio. You're waiting. You're listening to your favorite songs from 40 years ago in between weather updates. And there's a little bit of comfort that goes with that. However strong that fortress of our built into the ground basement was, the fortress of God is stronger.
Yeah. The word rest to me, several images come to mind. One is, the nation of Israel, when they leave slavery and bondage in Egypt, then their promise is that they will enter into God's rest. Their promise is that when they make it to Canaan,
and that's how they
God's
phrased Moses striking the rock that God didn't command him to strike, and him losing out on the inheritance. They said Moses will not find rest. Or that's how they phrased him not coming into the promised land.
Yeah. So the idea is that they would just cross the Jordan and lay down and have a big nap, but they would enter into the very land and the area where God had promised them and where he would protect them and where he would provide for them.
Yeah.
And so that's the picture I have when I hear this word rest. It's not necessarily that I'm sleeping, can be that, but more that I'm within the presence and I'm within the will of God.
Yeah.
And that would, no matter what's going on around you, no matter what challenges you have, if you're in the will of God, there is a certain rest there. There's a certain contentment. There's a certain certainty.
Yeah.
That you are where you're supposed to be. Even though all around you, the storm is going on, you're where you're supposed to be.
Can I give you a word to define what you've been talking about? Assurance.
Assurance, yeah. Blessed assurance, yeah.
I have that word in my mind because I just finished reading a week or so ago a really great book that if you haven't read it, you should pick it up. I'm talking to you, podcast audience, but also John.
Okay.
Called Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman. This is a book written by an African-American poet and theologian in 1947. This is the book that inspired Martin Luther King Jr.'s nonviolent resistance in the civil rights movement.
Yes.
Big, monumental work. It's 120 pages, so pretty short. And this dude's a poet, so it's a pretty fun read at the same time and just compelling and engaging. But he just has 5 chapters. It is Jesus and interpretation to kind of reorient us around the truth of Jesus, who he was. And most of what he does is just poetically say, you think Jesus is on your side in the white church, in the big church, in the well-funded church.
Ouch.
Meanwhile, Jesus was dark and homeless and whatever. And not saying he isn't on your side, but you've retroactively painted Jesus to be pro-capitalism, anti-Nazi, whatever. Maybe Jesus isn't pro-Nazi. But whatever your stance against Nazis is because it was in 1947, so World War II had just happened. Whatever your stance against Nazis is not a stance that Jesus had because he wasn't there. He wasn't in that conflict. He didn't have to deal with any of that. And you can't just sign up Jesus for everything you believe. Anyway, so he has Jesus and interpretation. And then talking about the disinherited, how Jesus was disinherited. Kind of what he means is he doesn't have a large inheritance. He's not from a big family that's rich and wealthy and comfortable and whatever.
The opposite.
He's disinherited. And that disinherited people use these defense mechanisms to try to survive a world that doesn't seem like it wants them. These 3 defense mechanisms: fear, disillusionment, kind of acting like the world isn't the way that it is, and hatred. So that first one, fear, a lot of that fear can come up in anxiety when the oceans are swelling, when the tornadoes going around.
So lack of rest.
And he gives this whole talk about fear and how it rips us away from God being our provider and can kind of tell us to act like animals and whatever. And he gets to the end and he talks about how the answer to fear as a Christ follower is assurance. And he tells this story about how in the 1910s, whatever, when he was growing up, there's a lot more superstition about weird stuff like shooting stars. And if you watch it outside, you're going to get shooting star poison and like get sick and whatever. Some of those like snake oil kind of conversations that were probably happening. And his mom didn't let him stay up for those for a while. But then one night, school age, his mom woke him up and they saw a shooting star. And he was like, Mom, why are we out here? We didn't take our anti-shooting star pills. I know this sounds a little crazy, but stick with me. That they believed at that time, kind of commonly around.
I never heard that. Interesting.
That maybe you could get sick by seeing a shooting star because it had some gas emitted or whatever. They were just kind of a craze around it. And he said that to his mom. And his mom's answer was, oh, don't worry about that. Jesus got us in his hands. Like, even though we know there's nothing to worry about, he was deadly afraid as a little kid. And his mom was like, what's that star going to do to us that Jesus can't save us from, that Jesus can't protect us from?
She had a good point, too.
This assurance, he said, he carried it all the way with him through the civil rights movement, through being attacked by police dogs and being hosed down with fire hoses. He had this assurance in Jesus that there's nothing that they can do to me that Jesus can't heal.
And that's the idea of rest. I mean, that's the idea of being in
this
that
confidence and this assurance that you're safely within God's hands. Even if you die, you're safely within God's hands. This I think all draws down to another psalm. It makes me think of it, which we might have to wrap up with this. I don't remember what psalm it is. Maybe you can tell me. But it starts with, I lift my eyes up to the hills. Where does my help come from?
That's, I think, 121 or
that
129.
Sounds right. 121.
121.
My help comes from the Lord, the creator of heaven and earth.
I think it's one of the so-called Psalms of Ascent.
Yeah. I think it's 121 because of that. It's where does my where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. What's fun about that first line is I lift my eyes up to the hills. It's not just I lift my eyes upward because that's where God lives and I'm about to talk to him. But they thought in that time that all gods, all divine beings,
like Zeus,
and when you worship Baal and whatever, that those dudes, those divine beings, live up on mountains.
Mm-hmm.
So in the later times in Israel before Jesus, where they keep building up idols, and then somebody comes in and tears them down and reinstates God, Yahweh worship and whatever, and then they build up idols again. Those idols are on hills.
High places, they say, yeah.
So when idolaters lift their eyes up, they're looking to the idols.
Okay.
So when he says, I lift my eyes up to the hills, it's a question, the second statement. Where does my help come from? NRSV says, from where will my help come? Why did you phrase it that way? Where does my help come from? Kind of what he's saying, among the other things, is does my help come from one of these idols up here, one of these false gods, imposters? No, my help comes from the Lord who created heaven and earth, not one of these other things who didn't create heaven and earth.
Yeah.
And there's just this assurance that when I rest in God, oh man, I want to say so much more about this. You were right to bring up the garden at the beginning and the end. That there's on the seventh day God created the first six, and on the seventh day God rested. He wasn't tired, he wasn't sleepy. He sat back, satisfied, surveying all his hands had done. I picture my dad, arms crossed, leaning back, gut out, big smile on his face, and shaking his head, very, very tiny shake up and down with a big old grin, just like, yeah, I did it. And there's this rest in God's presence that you see there, and then at the tree of life where God provides everything you need. And at the end of the book, Revelation 20, not the end of Genesis, the end of the whole Bible. Revelation 21, God makes a new heavens, a new earth. There won't be any more sickness. For he's wiped away every tear and wiped away all death, and he will be our God, and we will be his people, and he will dwell with us. And you get through all that, and that's great. You know that he's dwelling with us. But then you get to chapter 22. There's a river of life running through the city, just like Psalm 46. A river makes glad the city of God. Anyway, and on each side is a tree of life. So there's kind of two, for more people, I guess, who bears fruit in all seasons. All 12 months, it's bearing fruit, and its leaves are for the healing of the nations. Where I'm bouncing around the Bible so much right now. Where Jonah in Jonah 4 was trying to find shade from the beating sun under that giant single leaf plant. Maybe it's not a single leaf, but just like a plant that got
grew real quick,
and then it died.
Then he got mad. But
that's some Ecclesiastes. Everything is vapor. Everything is smoke. Nothing matters. Whatever. Everything's fading, except for the garden that we're looking for, where we find our rest and our peace and our assurance and our comfort. That garden with the shade of the tree of life, whose leaves are for the healing of the nations. That's that true rest. And when you see yourself right now in the middle of the chaotic world, under God's hand, in God's providence, then you can have that assurance that leads you to be calm and comforted in a 72 BPM heart rate, while the oceans are swelling and foaming and mountains are tipping over. And
that was that's a story I keep seeing again and again in the book of Acts, is the new believers, even though they had this horrible persecution going on, they still had joy, had peace, they had that assurance. The backside of verse 1 of what we read this morning, my salvation comes from him. So they had this assurance based upon the salvation.
And knowing who the Lord is.
Knowing, what the final score is.
Yeah.
So you kind of have that assurance,
And all your evidence for who the Lord is who he's been. That's why they always say, or why he always says, and they usually say, naming him, he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the God of those three victories with people who were trying not to work with him sometimes and being rebellious and
they had
being
their issues.
sneaky and
lying a lot. They had
God
the
who
problems.
brought you out of Egypt, so he can do that. His biceps are that big. What are you dealing with right now? Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah,
Appreciate
I think we thoroughly explained that verse.
I think we went all over the Bible, but we came back to what we were supposed to be doing.
We touched half the books in the Bible, at least. Cool. Well, we love doing these Verse of the Day podcasts where we can just show you not necessarily how easy it is, but how vibrant the Bible can be when you open it up. And the more you know about one passage, how it usually ties in very well with another passage. And the whole Bible is this one unified story leading to Jesus. If you want to know more about the Psalms, I'm going to link a series of, I think, 12 videos from an Ozark professor who teaches Psalms called More Than Prayers, Seeing Jesus in the Psalms. And we'll link that below, and you can go engage that and get more on it. Also, just read the Psalms for your own benefit. So you can sit up late at night listening to the Psalms and being like, oh, yeah, they get me.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. They're
Anyway,
good.
if you have any questions, comments, email me at ryan@kingswaymo.com. I've put that in most of the descriptions and have not gotten an email yet. And we're on episode 1.
Well, I'll send you one.
Yeah, send me one. Just to say, hey, I watched it.
Yeah, I watched it. It was really good.
In person.
Who was that guy with you? That was great.
Yeah. Or if you're on YouTube, you can comment below and say what you thought about the Psalm, what you think about desert seasons in Christian faith and all that. Anyway, do you have anything else?
Not really, except the Psalms are there to help you in the really hard times, and especially when you're facing death or something really, really difficult. They are a treasure trove. They are a medicine chest. They are there to help you, a lifeline. They are there to let you know you're not the only one. You're not the first one. You won't be the last one. And God is there even in the hardest times of life. So the book of Psalms are really a treasure that too often we ignore. And we need to pick it up and make it part of your heart, like those ancient Israelite kids that had to learn all these songs and the adults that learned all the songs. We need to try to get these songs in our hearts so they're part of who we are.
Yeah. Cool. Sweet. Well, we'll catch you next time. I'm bad at outros. Have a great and glorious day in the Lord. We'll see you later.
Thank you. All right. Very good.